Hello, welcome to this edition of the UMGoBlue.com podcast. This is Phil Callahan along with
Clint,
and we continue our preseason series. Today's podcast, we're going to talk about the defense.
Every year you start off down at the foundation. You tear it down. Doesn't matter what happened in the past or anything else. You take the defense and, you start from the foundation and build it back up. And that's the same thing as a football player too. So what are we working on right now? Fundamentals, from stance, start, technique, steps, tackling. We'll do takeaway drills, all those things that you see, early, probably in everybody's camp. But, we're taking our time as we do this. And, I told you all last spring about our depth. I think we have more depth. And, we'll see where it all ends up.
What we have coming back and how things project out for this season.
For us to have a successful season, we're going to have to play complementary football. It's going to take all three phases for us to have success, because of the youth that we have and everything else. But, that's the exciting part about getting ready for the first game. We'll see where we're at.
Well, Clint, we're going to start off at the quarterback position. Last season, we had Will Johnson for part of the season, and then we had J.R. Hill and Zeke Berry. And this year, we have J.R. Hill and Zeke Berry coming back. How do you feel about this position group?
Well, it was kind of a tale of two seasons for these guys. First, Zeke Berry started inside at nickel and struggled. So I think the run responsibilities inside the box really were just one step more than what he was capable of, at least last year. So it was by necessity that they moved him outside after Will Johnson was down with the injury. And then Makari Page came into the box, and both of those guys really flourished in those new roles. So it's Zeke Berry is really underrated, in my opinion, as an outside corner coming back here. When I looked at the Pro Football Focus rankings, he ranked as the number 762 corner in the country last year, just based on their different grading and metrics. So that certainly is not reflective of what he's capable of, because through the last 4 games, really from I think Indiana was the last time I saw any real major flaws from the corners, and then you got to the Northwestern game, the Ohio State game, and the Alabama game, and those guys were lights out against, you could argue against Ohio State and Alabama, maybe the two best wide receivers in the country last year, and probably still the two best wide receivers in the country this year. So I'm really, really excited for the ceiling for what these guys have, J.R. Hill and Zeke Berry, but they have a lot to prove. And I think the best thing that's going for these two guys right here is that they have to stay hungry, because there are a lot of young, really, really athletic, highly rated recruits behind them. Zeke and Jair have, a huge leg up because of experience. I think it's pretty clear cut that those two guys should be your starters. But if for whatever reason they are, they're not performing well, certainly there are guys behind them that'll be ready to jump in and take those snaps.
You made a great point. I think they came in and played some of their best football at the end of last season. And then, again, we barely saw Will Johnson. But when we did, he flashed and showed why he's such a great talent. So from my perspective, you basically have kind of the same guys. And then, as you said, some recruits and some new guys coming in who have a chance to play. Minus Will Johnson, it's hard to say we're better off than last year, even only having Will, for several games, right? But if these guys can come in and show the consistency early that they showed late, I think we're in a pretty good position with this group. But I can't say we're better. You can't subtract Will Johnson and say we're better, but I feel good about this group. So it's kind of it's kind of a are we like to say, are we better? Are we worse? We're slightly worse, but that's just because you're subtracting Will Johnson. I think there's a lot of potential depth here, and I'm expecting good things from this position group.
Yeah, I really think this is kind of an X factor for this defense. We expect the defense to be pretty good, really good, and obviously, especially early in the season, after we've talked about the offense, the defense is going to have to carry the load at least part of the season, but it's going to have a similar dynamic to what it had last year. This team is going to go as far as the defense can take them, and the offense hopefully get some time to get their feet under them and catch up. And this particular position, I think, is really the question mark as to whether this is going to be a good defense, a really good defense, or challenging to be the best defensive unit in the country. So some of those young guys behind, we've seen in the past. Keyshawn Harris, we've seen a little bit. He's an older guy, but one name I wanted to put out there that it did not get a lot of snaps last year, but has gotten some buzz coming out of fall camp is JoJo Edmond, number 16. He's a second year guy that turned a few heads during bowl practice. That if we see a third guy out there, maybe he's got a chance to slide into that nickel position next to Hill and Barry. But that's a guy that I think they're going to want to get onto the field and get a lot of meaningful experience, as we've seen Michigan do these last 4 or 5 years. They're gonna rotate, and they're gonna rotate early, and they're gonna get those guys meaningful snaps against the other team's top guys, and it pays off at the end of the year. We've seen it every single season. So that's one more name of a guy that I'm excited to see exactly how they utilize JoJo Edmond.
All right. So moving on to the safety position. Last season we saw Makari Page and Quentin Johnson primarily. This year coming back, we have Brandon Hillman, TJ Metcalf, Mason Curtis, and maybe Rod Moore, right? The tough thing in this position group is, again, you have the hopefully Rod Moore will be back, but again, he was out all last season. And then you have Makari Page and Quentin Johnson, who are gone, and they were both huge factors in the overall tackles. Like, you had Makari Page with 45 tackles and Quentin Johnson with 43. So, they ate up a lot of opposing defenses, and again was a major factor in stopping guys. So, you look at the guys coming back, and how do you feel about how we stack up coming into this season?
So this is one position that nationally is the question mark. When any of the national analysts are looking at Michigan's defense, they see a hole at safety, and I think that this particular group is going to shock those national analysts. Really, the only name that anybody knows is Rod Moore, and I'm sure we'll talk about him maybe toward the end with his rehab and coming back from injury. But the two guys right now that are probably slotted into the penciled into the starting lineup, Mason Curtis and Brandon Hillman, those guys together only had maybe 300 snaps of defense last year. And for comparison, Quentin Johnson played 670 snaps last year. Makari Page played 630 snaps just by himself. So it's a huge downgrade in terms of experience. But there are really, really high hopes for these younger safeties to be able to step in and have almost no drop off. Even in the absence of Rod Moore, there is a lot of optimism, especially around Brandon Hillman, the way that he can play extra physical and can play in the box. And then a transfer in from Arkansas, TJ Metcalf, is going to be probably who I would pick right now if I had to guess who's going to slot into that nickel position. He was a full-time starter for Arkansas, a defense that wasn't very good, but he got a lot of work on that Arkansas defense, and he's going to be the most experienced player in that safety group. And he really, really brings a physical presence similar to Brandon Hillman, but even more experience with tackling up near the line of scrimmage and in the box. So if I had to guess right now, I would guess that TJ Metcalf is the guy that slides into that nickel position where we saw Makari Page at the end of the year last year, where we saw Daxton Hill on the 21 defense, and then Mikey Sainer still picked it up coming over from offense. So really, really challenging position, but because of the mental challenge of that position, I would expect it to be the most experienced guy coming back, and that's going to be Metcalf, the transfer from Arkansas.
And that's the thing here, right? When you lose two guys like Page and Johnson, you really hope Rod Moore can come back, right? For lots of reasons. But even if he comes back, how long will it take for him to, you know, get back to playing speed? I mean, he missed an entire year, right? So I can understand why there's consternation nationally. I feel good about the guys here, but when you had, Page and Johnson, who you could just count on, right, for eating up snaps and producing, definitely this is a question mark for me. And I feel very good that you're optimistic. That makes me feel better because, again, we're going to be seeing different guys out there, and I think that this is going to be a position that opposing teams are going to scheme against early and try to attack. So I think they're going to have their opportunity to shine. And definitely, if I'm game planning against Michigan, I definitely look to attack this position and see what they have.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that early on, teams will do the same, but by the time we get to the second half of the season, uh, teams will have learned their lesson. I really think this particular position group is going to get a chance to shine. And as we'll talk about in a little bit here, the real strength of the defense is up front in the front seven. And these guys are the ones that are going to reap the benefits of added pressure on the quarterback and putting guys behind, putting the team, putting the offense behind the sticks, right? So you're going to have to challenge these guys down the field if you're constantly in second and long and third and long, and the front is kind of a menace the way that we expect them to be, as they were against Ohio State and Alabama to end the season last year. So these are going to be guys that are going to be put in the position to make big plays, create turnovers, and be ball hawks. So I think they're going to jump up and surprise some people early in the season.
Well, speaking of up front, the next position, defensive line. Last year we had Mason Graham and Kenneth Grant. Mason Graham, my favorite player from last year in that melee in Columbus. I was on the field between him and Jack Sawyer when he was sharing his thoughts with Jack. And I'm just glad that he was yelling at Jack because for a second I thought he was yelling at me and I didn't know what I had done. But when I looked around and saw Jack, I understand that, it wasn't anything personal against me. So again, you have Mason, who was a first round pick in the NFL draft. You have Kenneth Grant, who was a first round pick. And, you look at the production, Mason had over 47 tackles and Kenneth Grant had 32. These guys were just amazing building blocks. Coming back this season, looks like we're going to have Rashawn Benny, Trey Williams in from Clemson, and Trey Pierce in from Alabama. And I think one thing that makes me feel really good is that Michigan has a reputation of producing great guys up front, and not only are they growing talent, their own talent with recruiting, but they're attracting guys who want to be a part of this defense. So, how do you feel about this position group heading into the season?
So I I love Harbaugh's nickname for Mason Graham and Kenneth Grant from back when they were true freshmen when he called them God's gifts to football.
Yes, a gift from the football gods, along with Mason Graham. There were the two, and they're both playing tremendous.
And he proved to be correct. You know, like those guys were absolute freaks of nature on the football field. And Mason Graham was one of my favorites. I know you'll back me up from the press box all the way back to his freshman year. And I was like, it just seems like they're better when 55 is in the middle. It just seems like they're better when he's there because he is unblockable. And then as a sophomore, he established himself, every down being unblockable, and then was absolutely dominant last year. Um, so replacing those guys is nearly impossible, right? It's similar to the conversation we had about the tight end room in our offensive podcast. You're coming back from maybe the best that you've had at the position in the program's history. So it's going to be a step down when comparing to last year. But this particular group can make the case of being the deepest and strongest position group, not only on the defense, but maybe on the whole team. And to put it into the best context that I can, Rayshon Benny had 327 snaps last year, and that compares to 548 for Mason Graham and 547 for Grant. So not quite, not quite the same level of snaps playing behind those guys, but certainly 327 snaps is nothing to sneeze at. It's more than Trey Williams played at Clemson and more than Trey Pierce played at Alabama. So Rayshon Benny steps in with a significant amount of experience and was also a little bit dinged up at the end of the year. So probably would have had even more time on the field. And then when you look at the way they graded out, Mason Graham was number one nationally for interior defensive linemen. Kenneth Grant, number 26. Rayshon Benny was number 29 in Pro Football Focus. He's right there in the same tier in terms of how he is grading out on a snap-to-snap basis. So, again, I think he's a little bit under the radar, Rayshon Benny is, because those big names moved on. Nationally, he's not going to get the same kind of buzz until he does it on the field. But I have pretty high hopes that Rayshon Benny is going to open some eyes on the interior, just like when Mozzie Smith moved on and Chris Jenkins moved into that role. Like, oh man, what are we going to do? Lost a first-round draft pick, and then in came another, another day one draft pick. So huge hopes for Rayshon Benny to be a dominant force and a leader in that room. And then after that, it's about depth and figuring out how to rotate the rest of the guys. Many of them over 300 pounds, and all of them bringing very similar skill sets. So they're going to come in waves. I think Rayshon Benny will get, maybe 10 or 20% more snaps than the other guys, but there's going to be 5, maybe 6 guys that are getting snaps on a pretty equal basis on the interior there. And what that does is allow those guys to stay fresh, especially in the second half into the fourth quarter. I really think those guys are just going to wear down the interior of the offensive lines that they go against over the course of a full game because they're going to come in waves. The biggest challenge is probably for the defensive coordinator for Wink Martindale to figure out how to balance the rotation and how to make sure that you can actually get the guys on and off the field and that you're not getting caught with guys stuck on the field because the other team's going tempo. So couple logistics questions there, but I expect this to be one of the best groups in the Big Ten, if not the best. And Rayshon Benny, I expect him to put up numbers similar to what we saw from Kenneth Grant last year.
And I agree with you. I think this is a case of, you're going to have to say there's a dip of some kind just because Mason Graham was so amazingly consistent for all 3 seasons. And, you mentioned, as you said, you identified right when he came on the scene that he was just at a different level, a guy with a wrestling background who just, as a freshman, just kind of just stepped in and was a man among boys even then, right? So again, you're going to have a slight dip because the names are going to be different, but I think this is a position where Michigan just reloads. And I am expecting this to be the strength of the defense. And Again, I think we're going to see great things. And again, by having this kind of base to build your defense around, I think it's going to make every other position group better. And again, high hopes for this position group. Definitely agree with you there.
Yeah, the name to look out for, a guy that was recruited at the edge, Etta, recruited to play edge and was always a little bit too big to be quick enough off the edge, in my opinion. He started at like 260 or 265 as a freshman, and you know, kind of stayed out there with the edge guys for maybe half a season too long. They finally moved him inside last year, and now I think he's up over 300 pounds, and I think he kept most of those athletic traits that made him an edge recruit. He's going to be a guy that we're going to be looking down. Oh man, who was that? Who was that? Who did that? I think Etta is gonna surprise us early on in the season, making some big plays.
All right. Next position group, the edge. Last season, Michigan had Derek Moore and Josiah Stewart. Josiah has gone on to the NFL as a third round pick of the Rams. And this season, we have Derek Moore back, and we're hearing lots of great things about TJ Guy out of camp. How do you feel about this position group, Clint?
It's tough to pile on the praise for the guys last year more than the tackles, but Josiah Stewart was really, really ridiculously productive. He was nearly unblockable, really great against the run, even the pass. He ended up grading out as the number 6 edge player. So he went in the third round mostly because of his size and length. But in terms of production and the way he played snap to snap, he played at an All American level last year. And then Derek Moore comes back as a starter. He was top 100 last year on edge defenders nationally, and he's another guy that's been playing that spot since he was a true freshman. He's entering that third year, um, and he's on a similar trajectory as Mason Graham, in my opinion. I think he was productive as a freshman in limited snaps. Um, really stepped his game up last year into a starting role and was a plus defender. Not even just a starter, but also probably was at an all Big Ten level last year in his second year. And we will see very early if he takes another jump and can become dominant, because he happened to be one step behind Josiah Stewart, Mason Graham, and Kenneth Grant a lot of times last year. He beat his blocker many times and just didn't happen to get all the way to the quarterback or to the ball carrier because somebody else on the D line had swallowed him up. So if he plays at exactly the same level as last year, it'd be somewhat disappointing individually, but he still would end up being really, really good if that's the case. So the floor is super high for these edge guys. And if Derek Moore takes a jump similar to a Mason Graham style jump in his third year, then this defense is going to be scary. TJ Guy, like you said, is getting a lot of buzz coming out of fall camp. We have to kind of take that with a grain of salt, I think. But we saw him late last year really come on and play well. He had 419 snaps last year. He was not, there's a wealth of experience between those two guys, of course. And if TJ Guy did take a jump the way that they're describing, when we get these coaches' press conferences, then that will be a very, very welcome sign. And if this year's pair between Derek Moore and TJ Guy can duplicate what Josiah Stewart and Derek Moore did last year in terms of production and pressure and win rate against those offensive tackles, then this defense is going to be scary good. And also deep. Cam Brandt is kind of a Mike Morris style defensive end, right? He's more of kind of like an anchor, better against the run than I would say against the pass. But second year guy, Dominic Nichols is really kind of a pass rush specialist. He's got a chance to get some early playing time as they rotate, and keeping Moore and TJ Guy fresh for the fourth quarter is going to pay big dividends also. So not only is this group really, really good and very talented and lots of experience at the top, but they're also deep and young, and they're going to be good for seasons to come. So not many really highlight or discuss in the edge room. If they stay healthy, they could really, really create some havoc in big spots.
And again, another position group that is just uh, nationally renowned. And again, I feel like they just reload here. And if there's any area of the Michigan defense that continues to shine and is the anchor and the foundation of the entire defense, it's the D line and the edge, right? And,
Mm-hmm.
um, you know, both of these positions are featured in the defense in such a way that guys want to come here, be developed, not only succeed in college, but have a pathway to the pros. So definitely looking for good things and not to have a big drop off and hopefully, continue ascending in the next season.
Yeah. I think there's going to be a kind of a launching pad here for the Moore and Guy kind of being NFL prospects, but also those second string guys, Cam Brandt, Dominic Nichols. They are they're right there, and there's not gonna be much drop off when those guys rotate in.
All right. Next position, linebacker. We have last season we had primarily Ernest Hausman and Jashawn Barham, and we have both those guys back. And you look at Hausman's stats. I mean, led the team with 89 tackles, and Barham was second with 66. But Hausman was just all over the place. And to have both of those guys back is, you know, just a gift for the defense. And we're also hearing different names out of camp. We're hearing that Jimmy Rolder is pushing really hard. Going to be part of that rotation. How do you feel about this position group, and what are you looking for this season out of them?
Well, I love experience at the linebacker level for sure. So to get both starters back this year is really, really big for the heart of your defense. They make all the calls, they get guys lined up correctly up front. They communicate a lot about coverage with the secondary. So having two returning starters come back is going to be huge. Um, I think the experience not only of Ernest Hausman, but also the experience of Jimmy Rolder is going to play a factor, because I know they want to turn Jay Sean Barham loose as a pass rusher even more than they did last year. So he's a really, really dangerous blitzer. He's super athletic, really, really brings some thunder when he hits guys. And they even flirted with the idea of lining him up at edge. And I think if they weren't already stacked in the edge room, like we just talked about, then Jay Barham might play edge on any other team. He's up to almost 250 pounds. He's 6'3". I think he is going to get just fired out of a cannon to the quarterback on passing downs, because you have so much other experience at the linebacker position with Hausman and even Jimmy Rolder. So interesting to see how they kind of deploy those guys. If there's a struggle trying to find somebody to fit in at the nickel position, then we might see a little bit more traditional 4-3, with three linebackers on the field, because I think they really like all three of their experienced linebackers with Hausman and Barham and Rolder. That might be a variation that we see against teams that are run first, especially. And then another young guy, only 14 snaps last year, but is getting a lot of buzz, and certainly will start picking up snap share this year, is Cole Sullivan. This guy is going to be the next Jay Sean Barham. He's going to be the next Michael Barrett. He's going to be the next starting middle linebacker for a few seasons. Probably pairs with Jimmy Rolder next year, if depending on how eligibility shakes out. But keep your eyes peeled for another number 23 in the middle. That's Cole Sullivan. He definitely will rotate in and take some snaps this year.
So when I look at this defense as a whole, as I was watching tape from last year, I was saddened because the defense was so phenomenal last year and put in really bad positions by turnovers from the offense. And as great as last season ended with the victories over Alabama and the huge win over Ohio State, you play the woulda, shoulda, right? Like if the offense had been better, now flip that when I see the guys coming back and I see the depth that we have. I'm really excited about the defense this year. I think, again, it's hard to imagine that you're going to lose Mason Graham, Kenneth Grant, and Will Johnson. But the reality is that this defense is going to be stacked.
It's always exciting when, as a coach, to just see where it all comes out, and everybody's got the same chance. It's like we haven't even posted the depth chart yet because you don't need to. We divide them maize and blue because of the bridge program and all that stuff, but there's going to be great competition really at every position, everywhere on the defense.
And really excited to see what they're going to be able to do. Just really excited. And if this defense can continue to evolve and play at a high level, I think with improved offensive performance, Michigan really has the chance to surprise some people. So I know you've done some you've done some analysis of the stats on the defense. What are your views overall heading into this season?
So I looked back into last year, just kind of in my memory, and I kind of challenged myself to try to put into perspective how much the end of the season kind of whitewashed our memory of the middle of the season and certainly the beginning of last season. It was still a 5-loss season, even though it ended on a high note. And then when I had to go back and look at some of those losses, the offense did really put the defense behind the 8 ball over and over again. But even in terms of performance, I was like, man, I remember them being somewhat ineffective, especially on third down. I just remember if they had 2 good snaps in a row and put another team into third and long, it seemed like they gave up a lot of big plays on third and long and really improbable first down conversions that drove me crazy. So I looked it up, and then I asked you and our photographers, your brothers, Dell and Ryan and Lance, and I was like, what do you guys think? Where do you think this defense ranks in the last 9 years since I've been keeping the stats? What if you were just to rank them in terms of from expected points added, the metric that I like to use in the analysis. Low score for a defense is good, of course. So, where do you think they would rank if I put them in order? It's like, definitely not as good as 23, maybe 2018, 2016. They're probably third or fourth, They are eighth out of ninth. they are the only defense that they are better than is 2022. Is 2020 pandemic year when things went sideways on Don Brown. And it was brutal to see, especially the third down numbers right down there at the bottom again. So I think what we forget because it ended so well is how long it took for Wink Martindale and the players to settle into a rhythm and for Wink to really fit his scheme and his terminology to the college game. And those growing pains, I think, are past us. Or I'm sorry, I think we're past growing pains. But looking back at the performance numbers from last year, it was a kind of a sobering reminder that this season is really kind of a turnaround season. And that's why I have extra optimism for this year's team because I they did the work and went through the slump early last season and in the middle of last season. They've got those lessons learned, and so many of these guys played meaningful snaps in the second half of the season. Got guys into the right place like Zeke Berry moving outside, and the last wild card for this defensive unit this year is Rod Moore coming back at some point this year. I mean, that guy is one of the best safeties that Michigan has had in the last 10 seasons or so. And he wasn't on the field last year. Came back, got it, season ending surgery in the spring, and had to sit out the entire season. So having him at all this year is going to be an additional plus for this particular unit. So, as good as we felt about how last season ended, and I was with everybody, this team is going to be even better because the defense is going to play at a really, really high level, and I think it's going to snap one.
Well, Clint, I remember, again, we have great memories of how the season ended, but I remember early in the season last year, I was questioning whether this whole Wink thing was going to work out, right?
Mm-hmm.
And um, again, he bristled at comparisons to Don Brown, during the spring and the fall of last year, right? But looking at the situation, I can understand why people would think that. And, if we go back, remember he was a late addition to the coaching staff, right? He was probably not, let's be honest, probably not the first or second choice, right? And when he came in, one of the big things that Harbaugh had done to reboot the team that put it on the trajectory that resulted in the national championship was flipping the coaching staff younger. And when you looked at what Sharon did, the staff was younger, right? And Wink kind of stuck out that he was not younger, right? So there were a lot of, you could look at the look was, hey, it's another older defensive guy, right? And even at looking at, his attitude and the way he spoke, I could understand if the people who were reminded of Don Brown, and likewise, when the defense was struggling, you kind of wondered, right? And then there was a point last year, and he has spoke about it, um, that it dawned on him that he was trying to download information to these guys at an NFL level, and that they weren't NFL players yet. They may have NFL talent, but they weren't doing football 24 hours a day. He had to downshift his information download. The players had to rise up a little bit, and once they got on the same level, the defense took off, right? And it's interesting because heading into camp this year, or heading into fall camp this year, um, they would ask him. The media said, "Hey, so are there any differences?" And he's like, "No, everything's fine. Nothing changed." And I'm like, "No, something changed, and you did talk about it last year, right?" So it definitely is as if he has found his groove. But there was a time, and I've said this on the podcast repeatedly. Okay, I was incredibly frustrated at the Indiana game and the Illinois games last year. I did not go there expecting a loss. Okay, and a good chunk of it was the offense, but it was the defense too, and basically everything kind of all the gears lined up Northwestern and beyond, and I think he found his groove. The players found their groove, and I think they're in a really good place right now. So it's understandable that the afterglow of Ohio State and the rainstorm that pummeled Alabama and took them out of their game that Michigan took so much advantage of in the bowl game has rinsed away a lot of the bad memories from earlier in the season. But definitely, you can look at it, and it's interesting because looking back at what Wink said in the spring.
We got to know each other, and the players most importantly got to know us, and we got to know the players well of what they do well, where's the best spots we can put these guys, and and the execution of the defense improved throughout the year.
That's the thing where when you look back, okay, Wink has found his groove, right? And from a guy who was at the NFL level for so long, you can look at Michigan's players and look at the facilities and think, "Oh, I'm in the NFL again." Boom, boom, boom. And again, he had to downshift a little bit. Players had to get to know him, and again, I the players have not said this, okay, but previously you had two younger guys. They interact differently, and then you bring Wink in. So I'm sure there was a little bit of trepidation, right? And again, as a group, they have found each other, and it is magical, right? The Michigan defense is just humming, and he definitely gloated about, he was the OG of this defense that he had taught Jesse and Mike, the basics of this defense, and they had taken it to higher levels, but he understand how it worked, and I think he definitely showed that. So I think that you know that explains why a lot of the initial struggles last year were forgotten, and understand that that's part of my disappointment too. Is that when you go back, you see the players, you see all the pieces there, right? And
Mhm.
they showed up at Ohio State and just dominated, just crushed them, and the pieces were there all year. But again, the coaching needed to find its way, the players needed to find its way, and I think and I'll keep beating this drum. If the offense had been a little bit better last year, because very rarely did the offense bail the defense out last year, right? If the
Yeah.
offense had been able to do more earlier, it again, it's a woulda, shoulda, coulda season, and so you saw how good the defense eventually was, and hopefully we're going to see great things this year.
Yeah. And in terms of complementary football, you got a new punter again this year. We'll see how that works out for field position. That's one of my kind of football obsessions is kind of keeping an eye on how the field is flipping when you punt the ball. But also, it's another young. To reiterate what we said about the offense, the quarterback just turned 18 years old. Never been a starter at Michigan before. He, it's going to be uh, somewhat of a slow start. Even if they play well, it's going to be because Chip Lindsey is kind of layering things in slowly but surely, right? There's no way they're going to start with a full playbook and all of the reads for their brand new quarterback in the beginning of the season. So they're going to have to lean on the defense. Number one, to give the offense lots of opportunities. I think they need to be ball hawks. I think they need to create fumbles and havoc, by getting after the quarterback. They're going to have turnovers, especially early in the year, to give the offense more chances on short fields. I think that's going to be crucial. And then also, there are going to be times that this offense makes mistakes and turns it over the other way. And this defense is going to have to come in and slam the door shut and hold teams to field goal attempts in some pretty tough spots. And they're good enough to do it for sure, but it can't get into that dynamic and the pouting and, worried about the offense carrying their weight. They're just going to have to kind of embrace the role of being the leading edge for Michigan, at least in the first half of the season. And then hopefully everything comes together and they're clicking at a high level in all three phases. So there's no doubt that the defense is going to have to be elite immediately in the season for Michigan to have a chance to win on the road in week 2 against Oklahoma. So they are capable, and we know the system that came from the Baltimore Ravens that Wink Martindale is the OG of, and Mike McDonald came from that tree, and Jesse Minter came from that tree. It the value of that system is a lot of versatility and players that can do multiple things, especially at the safety level and on the edges and at the linebacker level. And that's where they have a lot of talent at the safety position, a lot of talent and experience at the linebacker and edge position. So there are lots of different tricks in the bag that Wink can use this year that he may not have even been able to break out last year. So they're as good as it got at the end of the year. There are still gears that they can hit that I am excited to see if they can do it. And again, the wild card of all wild cards is if and when Rod Moore comes back, and the mental, quickness and the leadership and putting him near the line of scrimmage or back behind the secondary as a safety, that's going to be a immediate impact when that happens, if that happens, and when that happens.
I mean, I could give you the BS answers. He's right on schedule. You know what I mean? Matter of fact, he's right on schedule. What's the schedule? I don't know. No, but he's looking, like he should, because the way he's been working his tail off, and when he's ready, I talked to him the other day. I don't want to do it too soon. I want to make sure you're ready. So whether it's put him in bits and pieces whenever he's ready to go, or go, you just don't know. We'll see it, but
and again, it's going to give another coach on the field sort of a feel to Wink Martindale. So as good as they start, there's going to be one more gear for them to hit if and when Rod Moore comes back full bore.
Jordan Marshall said something that I can't imagine ever hearing last season.
The energy and the spot that Chip and Coach Moore have this offense in is scary, and it's scary right now. It's not scary in a few weeks. It wasn't scary 2 weeks ago. It's scary right now. So the biggest thing with our offense that we're trying to capture is keeping that long term, is keeping this upward slope, never having a bad day, making sure that no matter if you're getting the ball, if you're not getting the ball, just playing without the ball. And I said it the other day to Coach Alfred, I was like, we have so many guys that can make plays, not just the first string guys that go out there, young guys have the abilities to make plays, and they're all detailed about what they're doing. They're all locked into meetings, and it's a standard that we've set, and Chip has set, and Coach Moore have set. And for them to, Chip and Coach Moore, to balance their offense and put it out there on the field, it's scary. And we've been challenging our defense, and to have that competitiveness with our defense, which, again, I've said this before, we play the best defense every single day. So to go against those guys and have that competitive juice, this is going to be one scary team.
That's great to hear. But what struck me was I'm wondering how much of the problems we had on defense early last season were the problem you had in you don't want to smother the offense in the crib, right? So, and I'm speaking about in fall camp and in practice early in the season, right? So you have an offense trying to find its way, and you have an amazing defense, right? And I'm wondering how much of the struggles last year on defense were not being able to play in practice full bore, right? If you go full bore with our defense against last year's offensive line, I can't imagine what that practice was like, right? And I went back and listened to the interviews last year, and a couple of guys said, "Oh yeah, occasionally the offense does well." I just can't imagine it, Clint. I can't, and I'm wondering how much that impacted the defensive install, right? Just it's Michigan talks about playing complementary football. How do you play complementary football when you have to kind of pull the defense back a little bit to let the offense kind of find its legs? And um, so when the guys talk about in this camp that the defense and offense are on an equal footing sometimes, okay, I think part of that is that you have a dynamic individual taking snaps at quarterback, and you know that's that's obviously Bryce, right? Bryce Underwood, who, as you said, just turned 18, you know, and gave presents out to everybody on the team in celebration of his new Beats partnership. Um, Bryce, looking for mine if you got any extra, right? But the reality is, okay, you do have something better to practice against. And I believe the guy saying that the offense is better, and that's going to make the defense even better, okay? Because they can go full bore. So again, it's you have this complementary, you have this yin and yang pushing against each other, and I think that when you look at the improvements on the offensive side of the ball, it's just going to make the defense better, right? So, again, looking at where we are right now, it's amazing to me because, um, there's been all this static in the wire about the hammer that's going to be dropped on Michigan, right? And we addressed that little tiny hammer um, from the NCAA in the last podcast. Recommend everybody go back and listen. And okay, you sweep that away. It seems like that focus has been so big nationally that people are forgetting that Michigan has an amazing defense coming back and some pretty serious offensive weapons. And, you look at the schedule and you look at this team and, you don't want to get too far ahead of your skis, but you look and you go, you always say if you have a strong defense, you can build from there. Well, we just went through the defense position by position, and some of the big names are gone, but there's new names coming, and there's a depth there and a system that develops players and basically pulling guys down the assembly line and installing them to be great. And I always think back to the season after Aiden Hutchinson. Like, so we had Aiden Hutchinson, who was just a generational player, and I think we all expected this big drop off the next year. And next guy up. And we've seen amazing edge players and amazing line players, and the defense has just continued to be outstanding. So you have a new coach come in, and there's a little bump in the road, but he's found his way. And you have all these top talents that are coming back and are high achievers. And I mean, okay, let's talk about Rod Moore, right? Imagine if the defense had Rod Moore last season. Okay? I mean, that was one of the areas of concern we had because he came in hurt and he didn't play all year. So imagine if, Will Johnson's not hurt and Rod Moore's not hurt. You have another generational defense, right? And you got Rod Moore coming back. And again, young guns waiting for their turn. So it's amazing to me that I think as much as Michigan is a known brand and always gets a fair amount of attention, that Michigan feels a little overlooked right now. And I have bated breath waiting to see this team on the field and seeing what they can do and where they can go.
It's true. I again because of the names that exited this defense, nationally, I think they are a little bit underrated. They are a little bit under. I think that they're going to take. I think they're going to take a step forward at safety, especially when Rod Moore gets back. I think they're going to take a step forward at corner because it's the same two guys a year older, and I think they're going to take a step forward at linebacker because it's the same three guys older. So you may take a step back on the defensive line where you lost the two huge guys, but everywhere else, I think you get better in the starting lineup, and there's young talent and depth at every position group. Even if you're kind of weathering some guys getting dinged up, I think they'll be able to get through that. So uh, again, to me, this defensive unit right now is underrated, but it's absolutely critical for the team and the win loss record that the defense starts out and is playing at a high level right away. Right, New Mexico should not pose much of a threat in the first week, but a road game in Norman, Oklahoma against an SEC opponent where they're probably going to be an underdog. I would say that is pretty grade A material for a test for this defense, and if they can really dominate that game and give the offense enough chances to try to win on the road, then we'll know that we've got something special.
So we talked a little bit about TJ Metcalf, and I was looking back at some of the notes in the spring.
Because the next step is the NFL, so I just wanted to have a closer feeling, knowing that Michigan produces a lot of guys to the league, just coming in and playing like a coach win.
That is not aspirational. That is what Michigan does right now. And again, the defense is reloading, and I'm excited about the year. So, well, Clint, any final thoughts on the defense?
No, definitely looking forward to see who can take the step forward and be the stars. Again, we'll keep our eyes peeled for some of those young guys, maybe names that we don't recognize right away, but there's going to be a wave of future stars that get some snaps early in the season. So a lot of good stuff coming up, and then we'll go game by game in our next one and figure out what we think Michigan's record's going to be and where they shake out at the end of the year.
All right. Well, that's going to do it for this edition of the GoBlue.com podcast. Very soon we will be back in Michigan Stadium. Very soon Michigan will be back on the field. I can't wait. That's going to do it. This is Phil Callahan along with
Clint Derringer.
Go Blue.
Go Blue.
It could be one guy one day, and then all of a sudden somebody that you're thinking he might be a year away or 6 months away or 2 months away, whatever, and all of a sudden he runs off 4 practices in a row, and you're like, it's just like I tell the players. I've never coached with anybody, an assistant coach, that didn't want to play the best players, and that's what training camp's about, and that's what's so exciting. If you're an old school football coach, that's what's exciting about training camp is just see these guys go. So nobody's crowned, and what we'll always do is we'll play the best 11 when it comes to game day, and defensively. I think our best goal that we talked about, and the players were talking about it, is that you shouldn't be able to tell what 11's on the field. And, that's a goal that we're striving for. We're not there. We're not even close to being there yet, but we will be.
Thank you for listening to the GoBlue.com podcast. All rights reserved.